Humans departed in silence. First document. The great chamber of the Galactic Council hummed with tension as representatives from 47 species gathered for the most significant vote in recorded history. Ambassador Zektor of the Hegemony stood at the central podium, his scaled hands gripping the edges as he addressed the assembly. The question before them was simple, yet monumental. Should humanity be expelled from the Council? Fellow beings, Zektor's voice resonated through the translation devices. We have tolerated the humans for 3 centuries. Their aggressive expansion, their refusal to follow proper protocols, their constant meddling in affairs that don't concern them. The time has come to act. In the human delegation section, Ambassador Sarah Chen sat perfectly still, her dark eyes observing every speaker, every gesture, every subtle exchange of glances between the other representatives. Beside her, Admiral Marcus Torres maintained his military bearing, though his jaw tightened with each accusation hurled at their species. The Etherian delegate, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline form, pulsed with agreement. The humans have disrupted trade routes with their so-called humanitarian missions. They interfere with natural selection processes on developing worlds. They refuse to acknowledge the established order. A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Vorthak representative, resembling a massive insectoid creature, clicked its mandibles in approval. They are too emotional, too unpredictable. Their concept of individual rights conflicts with collective harmony. Ambassador Chen finally stood, requesting permission to speak. The chamber fell silent as Zektor grudgingly granted it. Honored delegates, she began, her voice calm and measured. We understand your concerns. Humanity has indeed chosen a different path than many of our fellow species. We believe in protecting those who cannot protect themselves. We believe in growth through challenge rather than stagnation through comfort. We believe that sapient life has inherent value beyond economic utility. The Plutonian delegate, a methane-breathing entity in an environmental suit, interrupted with a mechanical voice. You see, this is exactly the problem. You impose your values on others. You destabilize carefully maintained equilibriums. Chen nodded slowly. If that is how you see acts of mercy and justice, then perhaps we have fundamentally different definitions of civilization. For the next 6 hours, species after species rose to voice their complaints. The humans had prevented the Krell from harvesting a primitive world's population for slave labor. They had shared advanced medical technology with developing civilizations without charging proper tribute. They had refused to participate in the systematic exploitation of resource-rich but militarily weak worlds. Admiral Torres stood when the accusations turned to military matters. You claim we are aggressive, yet we have never initiated conflict. Every military action we have taken has been in defense of others, or in response to direct threats. The Hegemony war chief, a towering reptilian being, hissed in disdain. You destabilize established power structures. Your fleets move without permission. You establish bases in neutral zones under the guise of humanitarian aid. We establish hospitals and schools, Torres replied firmly. We build infrastructure and provide protection to those who request it. If that threatens your power structures, perhaps you should examine what those structures are built upon. The debate continued as cosmic hours passed. The smaller species, those who had often benefited from human protection, remained largely silent. The Terran delegation noticed how many of them avoided eye contact, how they seemed to shrink into their seats when the discussion turned to specific incidents of human intervention. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human representative for scientific affairs, was the last to speak for Earth. We have shared our technology freely. We have opened our borders to refugees from dozens of worlds. We have asked for nothing in return except the right to exist peacefully alongside you. If this is seen as a threat rather than a gift, then we have learned something important about the nature of this council. Zektor called for the final vote as the cosmic day cycle reached its end. One by one, the species announced their decision. The hegemony voted for expulsion. The Etherians agreed. The Vorthak, the Plutonians, the Krell, the Dominion species all voted the same way. The smaller civilizations faced their moment of choice. The Zenari, whose homeworld had been saved from a plague by human medical teams, voted for expulsion with visible reluctance. The Korath, whose colonies had been protected from raiders by human fleets, did the same. The Peltai, whose children had been educated in human schools, also voted to remove humanity from the Council. When the count was complete, 39 species had voted for expulsion. Only 8 had voted against, all smaller civilizations who possessed little political power within the Council structure. Ambassador Chen stood as the result was announced. The chamber expected protests, demands for recounts, emotional outbursts. Instead, she simply nodded and gathered her documents. "The human delegation accepts the will of the Council," she said quietly. "We will begin the withdrawal process immediately." The ease of acceptance seemed to unsettle some of the delegates. Zektor had prepared for arguments, legal challenges, even threats. The simple dignity of the human response was somehow more unsettling than any drama would have been. "You have 90 standard cycles to remove all human presence from Council space," Zektor announced. "All trade agreements are voided. All mutual defense pacts are canceled. All cultural and scientific exchanges will cease." Chen bowed slightly. "Understood. We will comply fully with the Council's wishes." As the human delegation filed out of the chamber, and strange quiet settled over the assembly. They had expected satisfaction, a sense of closure. Instead, many felt an unexpected hollowness, as if something important had been lost rather than gained. The humans departed the Council station within 3 local days, their ships disappearing into jump space with minimal fanfare. They left behind empty offices, silent communication channels, and a growing sense among many delegates that they had acted in haste. But the vote was cast, the decision made. Humanity was no longer part of the galactic community. The Council congratulated itself on removing a disruptive element from their ordered society. None of them realized they had just made the greatest mistake in galactic history. Within weeks, the first signs of change began to appear. Trade routes that had been stable for centuries started experiencing problems. Pirates and raiders, once kept in, humans departed in silence. Second document. 6 months after the human expulsion, the first cracks in galactic civilization began to show. What started as minor inconveniences quickly escalated into systemic failures that no one had anticipated. The Korath Merchant Guild was among the first to feel the impact. Their cargo vessels, which had safely traversed the dangerous spiral arm routes for generations, suddenly found themselves under constant attack. The Bloodfang Raiders, a notorious pirate organization that had been mysteriously quiet for decades, emerged with a vengeance. Captain Veltash of the merchant vessel Prosperity's Dream watched in horror as 3 raider ships dropped out of hyperspace directly in his path. His cargo hold was filled with medical supplies destined for the plague-stricken worlds of the Outer Rim. But the pirates wouldn't care about humanitarian missions. "This is Captain Veltash requesting immediate assistance," he broadcasted on all emergency frequencies. "Under attack by Bloodfang Raiders at coordinates 77 Mark IV. The response came from a hegemony patrol ship 2 hours away. "Acknowledged, Prosperity's Dream. We'll investigate after we complete our current patrol route." 2 hours meant death. Veltash remembered when such calls would have been answered within minutes by the nearest human patrol. The humans had maintained rapid response fleets throughout the galaxy, appearing wherever they were needed with almost supernatural speed. The Bloodfang Raiders boarded his ship with brutal efficiency. They took not just the cargo, but half his crew as slaves, leaving Prosperity's Dream crippled and drifting. When the Hegemony Patrol finally arrived, they found only wreckage and bodies. Similar incidents multiplied across the galaxy. The carefully maintained peace that had existed for 3 centuries began unraveling as predatory species recognized that the humans were truly gone. On the Council Station, emergency sessions became daily occurrences. The Zanari delegation, led by Ambassador Kethera, stood before the assembly with visible desperation. "Honored delegates," Kethera's melodic voice carried undertones of panic. "The plague that ravages our southern colonies continues to spread. Our medical facilities are overwhelmed. We formally request emergency medical assistance from any member species." The chamber remained uncomfortably silent. The Etherians had advanced medical knowledge, but considered biological ailments beneath their concern. The hegemony possessed excellent military medicine, but refused to share it with weaker species. The Plutonians' methane-based biology made them incompatible with most other forms of life. Zektor shifted uncomfortably in his position as council speaker. "The Zanari situation is regrettable but each species must be responsible for its own medical needs. This builds character and promotes self-reliance." "Self-reliance?" Kethara's voice rose to an unprecedented level for her peaceful species. 12 million of our people have died in the past month alone. The humans would have responded immediately with medical ships and research teams." "The humans," Zektor replied with forced calm, "were expelled for good reason. Their interference prevented natural selection from taking its course." But even as he spoke, Zektor felt a growing unease. Reports from hegemony intelligence painted a troubling picture of galactic stability. Crime rates had increased by 400% in former human patrol zones. 3 minor wars had broken out between previously peaceful neighbors. Supply lines for essential goods were failing as merchant vessels avoided increasingly dangerous space lanes. The Vorthak delegate approached the podium with his usual clicking gait. "The Hive has completed analysis of galactic security data. Criminal activity has increased exponentially since human departure. Economic losses approach 7 billion standard credits per cycle." A murmur of concern rippled through the assembly. 7 billion credits was more than some entire species' annual economic output. Dr. Sith L of the Plutonian Empire added her mechanical voice to the discussion. "Our economic models show cascading failures across multiple sectors. Agricultural worlds cannot ship food to manufacturing centers. Medical supplies are not reaching populations in need. The infrastructure that supported galactic commerce was more dependent on human protection than previously calculated." The revelation struck the assembly like a physical blow. For centuries, they had taken for granted that trade ships would arrive safely, that communication networks would function, that aggressive species would remain contained within their borders. They had attributed this stability to the natural order of things, to the wisdom of council policies, to the deterrent effect of mutual cooperation. None of them had realized that human fleets had been quietly maintaining the peace, that human diplomats had been resolving conflicts before they escalated, that human medical and engineering teams had been solving problems that would otherwise have caused systemic collapses. Ambassador Yithara of the small but influential Delphic republics stood to address the assembly. Her species had been among the few to vote against human expulsion, and her words carried the weight of prophecy fulfilled. "Honored colleagues," she began, her telepathic abilities allowing her thoughts to reach every mind in the chamber simultaneously. "6 months ago, I warned that humanity served as the stabilizing force in our civilization. You dismiss these concerns as the fears of a weak species dependent on human protection." The chamber fell silent as her mental voice continued. "The humans never demanded recognition for their services. They never claimed credit for the peace we enjoyed. They simply acted, quietly and efficiently, to maintain the stability that allowed all of us to prosper." She paused, letting her words sink into the minds of beings who had begun to understand the magnitude of their error. Now we face the consequences of our arrogance. Pirates terrorize our shipping lanes because human patrol fleets no longer guard them. Diseases spread unchecked because human medical teams no longer respond to planetary emergencies. Minor disputes escalate into wars because human diplomats no longer mediate before conflicts spiral out of control. Zektor attempted to maintain his authority. The Council made the correct decision. Human interference prevented the natural development of galactic civilization. We will adapt to these temporary difficulties. Temporary? Yathara's mental voice carried a tone of bitter amusement. Intelligence reports indicate that the Savage Armada is massing in the void sectors. The Dark Fleet has emerged from the galactic rim. The Devourers have awakened in the dead zones. These threats remain dormant not because they were weak, but because they feared human retaliation. The implications of her words sent waves of terror through the assembly. The great threats of galactic history, the nightmare civilizations that had once ravaged entire sectors, were stirring from their long slumber. The humans contained threats we never even knew existed, Yathara continued. Their deep space monitoring stations tracked potential dangers. Their rapid response fleets eliminated problems before they became crises. Their intelligence networks identified and neutralized threats that would have destroyed entire civilizations. Council Speaker Zektor found himself in the UNO Humans Departed in Silence, third document. 18 months after the expulsion vote, the Galactic Council faced its darkest hour. The emergency session convened as reports flooded in from across the galaxy, painting a picture of civilization in free fall. Ambassador Zektor, once proud and confident, now looked haggard as he addressed the emergency assembly. Dark circles under his reptilian eyes spoke of sleepless cycles spent trying to contain the growing chaos. "The situation reports are before you," he said, his voice lacking its former authority. "The Bloodfang Raiders have conquered 6 star systems. The Savage Armada has emerged from the void sectors and destroyed the Outer Ring colonies. The plague that began in Zanari space has spread to 14 different species across 47 worlds. The chamber, once filled with 47 proud civilizations, now hosted only 31. Some species had withdrawn from the Council to focus on their own survival. Others had simply gone silent, their homeworlds cut off from galactic communication. Dr. Yathara of the Delphic Republics stood to deliver the most devastating report. Her telepathic abilities had allowed her people to monitor the crisis more effectively than others, but the knowledge brought no comfort. "The Dark Fleet has reached the spiral arm," she announced, her mental voice heavy with despair. 3 star systems have been completely sterilized. Preliminary estimates suggest 15 billion casualties. A horrified silence gripped the assembly. The Dark Fleet was legend, a nightmare from the galaxy's ancient past that had consumed entire civilizations before disappearing into the cosmic void. Its return meant extinction for anyone in its path. "Our combined fleets cannot stop them," Admiral Kethval of the Hegemony military admitted, his warrior's pride shattered. "We engaged their advanced scouts with a task force of 200 ships. Only 3 vessels escaped to report. The enemy technology is beyond our understanding." Ambassador Chen's words from the expulsion vote echoed in many minds. If this is how you see acts of mercy and justice, then perhaps we have fundamentally different definitions of civilization. They had dismissed her statement as human arrogance. Now they understood it as prophecy. The Korath trade delegate stood with visible trembling. "My government has authorized me to make a formal plea. We request, we beg, for the Council to approach human space with an offer of full reinstatement. We will accept any terms they demand." Similar declarations came from delegation after delegation. The proud civilizations that had voted to expel humanity now prostrated themselves, begging for the return of the species they had scorned. But their attempts to contact human space met with the same eerie silence that had persisted for months. The communication channels remained open, but no one answered. Long-range sensors showed human ships moving within their territory, human colonies functioning normally, but they refused all contact with the outside galaxy. It was Ambassador Cathara of the Zanari who finally broke down completely. Her species, once numbering in the billions, had been reduced to scattered refugee populations fleeing the plague that continued to spread unchecked. "They're watching us die," she whispered, her melodic voice cracking with grief. "The humans are there, behind their borders, watching our civilization collapse, and they're doing nothing to help us." But Dr. Ithara, whose telepathic abilities had begun picking up faint signals from the edge of human space, shook her head slowly. "No, they're not watching us die. They're mourning us." The distinction seemed meaningless to most of the assembly, but Ithara continued, "I sense great sadness from human space. Not anger, not satisfaction at our suffering, profound grief. They weep for every world that falls, for every species that faces extinction, but they will not act." "Why?" Zektor demanded, his voice breaking. "If they possess the power to stop this catastrophe, why do they remain silent?" The answer came from an unexpected source. A small holographic projector activated in the center of the chamber, displaying the image of Admiral Marcus Torres, the human military representative who had been present at the expulsion vote. "Because you taught us that our help was unwanted," Torres said, his face showing the weight of 18 months of watching galactic civilization crumble. "You made it very clear that human interference in galactic affairs was unacceptable." The assembly erupted in desperate voices, calling out simultaneously, begging for forgiveness, pleading for aid. Torres waited patiently for the chaos to subside before continuing. "For 3 centuries, humanity served as the galaxy's immune system. We fought the monsters hiding in dark space. We contained the plagues before they spread. We stopped the wars before they began. We did this not because we sought power or recognition, but because we believed it was right." His image flickered as the transmission struggled across the vast distances. "You called us arrogant for believing in the value of individual life. You called us disruptive for protecting the weak. You called us interfering for refusing to allow genocide and slavery." Zektor stepped forward, his pride finally shattered completely. "Admiral Torres, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I formally apologize for our grave error in judgment. We were wrong. We understand now what humanity provided for galactic civilization. We beg you to resume your protection of Council space." Torres's expression didn't change. "Council Speaker, you missed the fundamental point. We didn't protect Council space. We protected all space, all life, all hope for a better galaxy. The Council was simply part of that protection." "Then why have you stopped?" Cathara cried out. "Why do you allow innocents to suffer when you have the power to save them?" "Because," Torres replied with infinite sadness, "you voted to reject not just humanity, but the principles we represented. You chose order over justice, stability over growth, comfort over compassion. The galaxy made its choice democratically and overwhelmingly." The terrible logic of his words struck the assembly like a physical blow. They had indeed voted, freely and decisively, for a galaxy without human values. The humans were simply honoring that democratic decision. Dr. Ithera pressed forward desperately. "But the smaller species, the weak civilizations, they voted against their own interests out of fear. Surely you won't abandon them to extinction." Torres's expression softened slightly. "Dr. Ithara, your species showed wisdom and courage in opposing the expulsion vote. But even wisdom cannot undo democratic choices. The galaxy spoke with one voice. We listened." "What will it take?" Zektor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What would convince humanity to return? Name your price." Any price. The silence stretched for long moments before Torres replied. There is no price, Council Speaker. You cannot purchase what you rejected. The humans you knew, the humans who served as the galaxy's guardians, they were shaped by their place in galactic civilization. That place no longer exists. The hologram began to fade as the transmission ended. The galaxy chose to define itself without human interference. We wish you success in that endeavor. As the image disappeared, leaving the assembly in stunned silence, the full magnitude of their loss became clear. They had not simply expelled a troublesome member species. They had rejected the very concept of selfless service that had kept their civilization alive. Outside the council chambers, the galaxy continued its slide into chaos. The Dark Fleet advanced through another star system. The Bloodfang Raiders expanded their territory. The plague spread to 3 more worlds. Ancient horrors awakened in the deep void. Sensing that their greatest enemy had finally withdrawn from the field, humanity remained within their borders, their ships patrolling only their own space, their medical teams treating only their own sick, their diplomats negotiating only their own treaties. They had become exactly what the Council had demanded, a species that minded its own business and left others alone. The galaxy was finally free from human interference. The irony was that freedom meant death, chaos, and the collapse of everything the galactic community had built over millennia. In the end, the Council learned too late that some interference was not tyranny, but salvation. Some meddling was not arrogance, but love. Some disruption was not chaos, but the very foundation of peace itself. The humans had departed in silence, honoring the democratic will of the galaxy. And in that silence, the rest of civilization discovered what the universe looked like without guardians, without heroes, without hope. They had gotten exactly what they voted for. The tragedy was that they had never understood what they were really choosing until it was far too late to change their minds. Precedented position of losing control of an assembly session. Delegates began speaking among themselves, ignoring protocol as panic set in. The Korath delegate stood abruptly. My government formally requests to open communication with the human territories. We must attempt to negotiate some form of limited cooperation agreement. As does the Zenari Republic, Kethara added immediately. The Delphic Republic support this motion, Ithara confirmed. But when they tried to establish contact with human space, they discovered something that chilled them to their cores. The communication networks were active, the channels were open, but no one was responding. The humans had withdrawn completely, pulling back behind borders that seemed to have become impermeable overnight. It was as if 40 billion humans had simply vanished from the galaxy, leaving behind only empty space and growing chaos in their wake. The Council had gotten exactly what they voted for, but none of them had understood what that really meant. As reports of system failures and security breaches poured in from across the galaxy, one terrible truth became clear. They had expelled not just humanity, but the very foundation of galactic peace itself. And now, as ancient threats awakened and civilization began to crumble, they realized they had no idea how to fix what they had broken. Check by the mere presence of human patrol fleets began testing the boundaries of civilized space. The Zenari were the first to send a quiet inquiry about renewing medical cooperation agreements, only to receive no response from human space. The communication channels remained open, but no one was answering. Slowly, across dozens of worlds, the same realization began to dawn. The humans hadn't just been members of the Council, they had been the invisible foundation that held much of galactic civilization together. And now they were gone.